The old man thought he found a treasure in the trash. He had no idea he had just invited death into his home. Mr. Ho had spent most of his 78 years in the same neighborhood on the outskirts of Saigon. The once lively streets had quieted over the decades, leaving rows of rusted gates and dim yellow lights flickering above cracked sidewalks. Every morning before sunrise, he would wander down those silent alleys, pulling his little cart behind. Him, collecting empty bottles, broken fans, scraps of metal, anything that could fetch a few coins at the junkyard. Life had become unbearably quiet since his wife, Lan, passed away 15 years ago. Their children had moved to America to build new lives, leaving him with nothing but faded photographs and memoirs that haunted every corner of his small home. At night, when the cicadas stopped singing and the dogs fell silent, he often felt as if he were the only living soul left in the entire city. The loneliness pressed on his chest like an invisible weight that one humid dawn in July. As he rummaged through a pile of discarded electronics beside the trash bins behind an old repair shop, something caught his eye. Nestled between broken televisions and tangled wires was a radio, an antique one from the days before the war. Its wooden frame was chipped and the speaker cloth sagged with mildew, but its brass knobs still gleamed faintly under the streetlight's glow. The brand was National Panasonic, the same as the one he and Lan used to listen to every morning, back when her laughter filled their kitchen as she cooked breakfast. His gnarled hands trembled as he picked it up. For a moment, he closed his eyes and pressed the radio against his chest. The scent of old wood and rust filled his nose, stirring something deep within him, something tender, something painful. He placed it carefully into his cart, covering it with a sheet of plastic to protect it from the morning drizzle. As he wheeled it home, he imagined sitting by the window, sipping weak tea, while the radio played old love songs and folk melodies, just like it used to when Lan was alive. The thought warmed him more than the humid air ever could. When he returned to his tiny house, the sun had not yet risen. Shadows clung to the peeling walls as he carried the radio inside. He set it down on the wooden table beside his bed and sat staring at it for a long time, running his fingers over the cracks and scratches on its surface. "I'll fix you up," he whispered, as if speaking to an old friend. "We'll listen to music together again." He spent hours that morning wiping away the layers of grime. With a damp cloth, dust billowed into the air, making him cough, but he didn't care. Each stain he removed revealed more of the radio's beauty. The warm round wood, the intricate speaker grill, the old frequency dial that displayed numbers, fading into sepia. Finally, when he was done cleaning it, he sat back on his creaky stool and admired his work. The radio still looked battered and worn, but to him, it was beautiful. A relic of simpler days, a bridge to memories that never truly left him. He turned it over and opened the battery compartment, only to find it empty and corroded. With a sigh, he closed it back and placed it gently on the table. He would find batteries for it tomorrow. For now, just having it there made his house feel a little less hollow. That night, after a dinner of cold rice and pickled vegetables, Mr. Ho sat on his thin mattress, staring at the radio bathed in the pale glow of his single fluorescent bulb. Outside, the wind rustled the banana trees and distant thunder rumbled across the sky. Rain began to patter against the tin roof, filling the room with a soothing rhythm dot as sleep began to pull him under. He thought he heard something, a faint crackle, a whisper of static. He opened his eyes, but the room was empty. The radio sat silent on the table, unmoving. Shaking his head, he chuckled at himself. "Old years playing tricks again," he murmured, pulling his blanket up to his chin. But deep in the quiet of that rainy night, as the minutes passed and dreams began to swirl in his mind, the radio remained awake. Its dial flickered ever so, slightly in the darkness. If anyone had been there to look closely, they would have seen the needle shifting slowly across empty frequencies, searching for a voice long lost. That night, the radio turned on by itself. A woman's voice whispered his name through the static. The next morning, Mr. Ho woke before dawn, as always. The rain had passed, leaving the air damp and cool. His bones ached as he stretched and shuffled to the small stove to boil water for tea. As the kettle whistled softly, he glanced at the radio on his table. For a moment, he thought he saw its dial twitch, but he shook his head, blaming his failing eyesight. After tea, he slipped on his worn sandals and left for the market to find batteries. Along the way, vendors set up their stalls, spreading tarps and unloading vegetables under the pale blue morning sky. The city smelled of wet concrete and fried dough. At a dusty electronics stand, he found 2 old D batteries and paid with the last crumpled bills in his pocket. Holding them tightly, he hurried home, excitement bubbling inside him like a child waiting to unwrap a gift. He inserted the batteries carefully, praying they still had power. At first, nothing happened. He twisted the knobs back and forth, adjusting the frequency dial with trembling fingers. Then, with a sudden pop, the radio came to life. Static filled the room, hissing and crackling, and his heart leapt with joy. Come on, come on. He whispered Dot. He turned the dial slowly, passing station after station of empty noise until a faint melody floated out, scratchy but unmistakable. It was Yellow Leaves Falling, an old love ballad from his youth. His eyes filled with tears as he sank into his chair, closing his eyes, letting the haunting voice of the singer wash over him like rain on dry soil. For the first time in years, his house felt alive. That night, he ate his dinner while the radio played beside him. After washing his bowl, he sat in silence, listening to the ghostly music drifting from the old speaker. The wind outside rattled the window frames, and the shadows in his room seemed to sway with each trembling note. Dot. As midnight approached, the radio fell silent. He reached over to switch it off, but before his fingers touched the knob, it crackled again. A faint voice emerged from the static, so soft he thought it was the wind. Oh, he froze. The voice was female, weary but familiar, curling around. His name like a gentle embrace. Ho? His heart thundered against his ribs. Lan? He whispered, barely daring to breathe. The static rose, drowning out the voice. He leaned closer, pressing his ear to the speaker, his hands trembling. Silence, just the low hum of empty frequencies. Tears blurred his vision. He sat back, feeling foolish, scolding himself for thinking such a thing. His wife was gone, dead, and buried. He was just an old man hearing echoes of his memories. He turned off the radio and lay down, pulling the thin blanket up to his chest. Sleep came in fits, each time dragging him into restless dreams of a dark hallway and a woman calling his name from the end of it. He woke before dawn, sweating and cold, the radio still silent on the table. The following days passed quietly. Mr. Ho spent each morning gathering scrap, each afternoon cleaning and oiling the radio, and each evening listening to the faded songs of the past. Each night at exactly 2:13 a.m., the radio would crackle to life without warning. Dot. At first, it was only static. Then, on the third night, he heard her again. Ho, why did you leave me here? The voice was clearer this time. It carried a sadness so heavy that his chest tightened as tears slipped down his lined cheeks. He clutched the radio close, resting his forehead against the cold wooden frame. Lan, I didn't leave you, he whispered into the darkness. You left me. The static hummed, then faded. The room fell silent again, but he could still feel her presence, lingering like a chill breeze across his bare arms. On the fourth night, he waited in his chair, holding the radio in his lap as the clock ticked toward 2:13 a.m. The air felt heavy and electric, as if the entire world were holding its breath. When the minute hand reached its mark, the radio came alive. The static, this. Time was different, deeper, layered with distant sounds he couldn't quite make out. Then her voice cut through, strong and sorrowful. "Ho, it's so cold here. I've been waiting for you. Where are you?" He whispered, gripping the radio so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Come to me. I'm so lonely." Radio crackled, and he thought he heard something behind her words. A low moan, or perhaps a chorus of whispers overlapping. His breath quickened, chest rising and falling in panic and grief. Tears streamed down his face as he closed his eyes, hearing her words echo through his bones. "Soon, soon you will join me." Then the voice was gone, leaving only the static that seemed to buzz deep inside his skull. He sat frozen, staring at the dark window. Outside, the banana leaves rustled softly under the moonlight, casting twisted shadows onto the cracked walls. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in his chair, cradling the radio, rocking back and forth as the first hints of dawn crept across the sky. Birds began their morning calls, and motorbikes roared awake in the streets. But Mr. Ho remained in silence, lost in a fog of memory and fear. That morning, as he watched the sunrise spill pale gold into his room, he thought about death, for the first time in many years. Not with fear, but with a tender longing. The idea of being with Lan again, hearing her laughter, holding her warm hands, pulled at him with a sweetness that made his chest ache. He turned to the radio, its wooden frame glowing in the morning light. He reached out and ran his fingers over the smooth dial. "Soon," he whispered Dot outside. The city awoke with all its noises and life, but in Mr. Ho's small room there was only silence, and the promise of a voice waiting in the static. Every night, her voice grew clearer. Every night, his house grew darker. Mr. Ho spent the next day moving through life in a daze. He could hardly remember his walk to the scrapyard, or the weight of metal in his cart. People spoke to him. Vendors offering deals, neighbors nodding their greetings, but their words were muffled, lost under the echo of her voice, still ringing in his ears. That night, he did not bother eating. The rice stayed cold in its pot, and the pickled vegetables floated untouched in brine. Instead, he sat by the window as dusk crept across the city, shadows pooling in corners and bleeding into each other until his room felt like a hollow cave. He watched the banana trees sway under the moonlight, their wide leaves rustling with each brush of wind, whispering secrets only the night could. Here, he placed the radio gently on his lap, his gnarled fingers stroking the wooden frame as if it were a beloved pet. The anticipation coiled tightly inside him, painful and sweet. He knew she would come tonight. The thought filled him with a trembling fear, but beneath it lay a desperate, aching hope. Hope that he could hear her voice again. Hope that she would say his name like she used to when dawn broke, and she woke beside him with sleep-heavy eyes and a smile that could quiet every storm in his chest. Dot exactly 2:13 a.m. The radio turned on Dot. No twisting of knobs, no touch of human hand. It simply woke, as if breathing in the dark. The static was thick, vibrating in his bones, almost physical. He closed his eyes, letting it wash over him. Then her voice came, soft and broken. "Ho, I miss you." His chest tightened so sharply, he thought his ribs might shatter. Tears slid down his face unchecked. "I miss you too, Lan." he whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of 1,000 lonely nights. "It's so dark here, so cold." A sob tore through him, ragged and dry. "Where are you, my love? Tell me where." "Here with me forever." The static grew louder, swirling around her words like a storm. And then, layered beneath her voice, he heard something else. A chorus of whispers, low and overlapping. Voices of men and women, young and old, speaking in a language he could not understand. Their words felt heavy and wrong, pressing down on his chest until he struggled to breathe. He gripped the radio tighter, his fingers digging into the wood. "Lan, what is this? Who are they?" The whispers rose, growing frantic, echoing around his small room until he felt them under his skin, slithering like cold water into his veins. His heart raced in terror. The shadows along the walls seemed to move with the whispers, stretching and curling like grasping fingers. Then her voice cut through them all, clear and ringing with a sweetness that made him weep. "Don't be afraid. Ho, they're just waiting." "For what?" "For you." The radio snapped off. The room fell into suffocating silence. Mr. Ho sat frozen, the radio clutched to his chest, his breath coming in shallow gasps. Sweat dripped down his temples, soaking into his thin undershirt. The shadows on the walls pulsed with each flicker. Of the fluorescent bulb, shapes crawling just out of sight. He felt them, felt her, all around him, watching. The first hint of dawn began to creep through the cracks in his curtains, painting thin golden lines across the dusty floor. The whispers faded with the darkness, leaving only the lonely call of a distant rooster and the whir of ceiling fans coming to life in neighboring houses. That morning, Mr. Ho did not move from his chair. His knees ached, his back screamed in pain, but he sat unmoving, staring at the dead radio in his lap, rocking back and forth as silent tears slid down his face as the day wore on. Neighbors knocked on his door to bring him breakfast or check on him, but he did not answer. Through the warped glass windows, they saw only his shadow sitting hunched by the table, UNMOVING. Inside. Mr. Ho was lost in memories. He remembered the way Lan used to hum while she cooked, the smell of jasmine oil in her hair, the warmth of her small hand resting on his arm as they walked to the market. He remembered the night she died, how she lay in bed, her chest rising and falling in shallow gasps, her eyes glazed with fever. He remembered begging her not to leave him, clutching her cold hand long after her last breath had rattled into the night. The loneliness that followed had been worse than death. That night, he did not wait until 2:13 a.m. As dusk fell, he switched. On the radio himself, twisting the dial back and forth, searching for her voice. Static roared in his ears, harsh and grating, but he welcomed the pain. It reminded him he was still here, still waiting for her. "Lan," he whispered over and over, rocking in his chair, eyes unblinking. "Lan, talk to me, please." Hours passed. The moon climbed high above the banana trees, casting long shadows into his room. The radio remained silent, except for the seething hiss of empty frequencies. His eyelids drooped, heavy with exhaustion, until he could no longer keep them. Opened out then. As the clock ticked to 2:13 a.m., the static shifted. He snapped awake. The noise grew deeper, almost like a growl, vibrating through the floorboards. And then he heard her, but this time, her voice was right beside his ear, not coming from the radio. "Ho!" He turned his head slowly, heart thudding so violently, he thought it might burst. In the reflection of the radio's dusty glass, he saw her standing behind him. Her long black hair fell wet against her face, her white funeral abo dye clinging to her thin shoulders. Her eyes were empty hollows, deep and dark, but her mouth was smiling. She leaned down until her cold lips brushed his ear. "Come with me." He could not move, could not scream, could only sit frozen as her smile widened, stretching impossibly across her pale face. The static roared louder, filling every corner of the room, rattling the windows and making the floorboards tremble. "Come with me." The shadows wrapped around him like arms, and for the first time in 15 years, he felt her embrace. They found him dead, clutching the radio. But his neighbors still hear two voices singing at dawn. Morning came slowly, a pale, silent dawn creeping over the rooftops like a ghost. The streets filled with the sounds of roosters crowing, motorbike, engines sputtering to life, and street vendors calling out breakfast prices to bleary-eyed customers. But in Mr. Ho's small house, there was only stillness. The neighbors knocked on his door around 7, as they did every day to bring him warm soy milk and a steamed bun. When he did not answer, they waited, thinking perhaps he was sleeping late for once. But by 9, unease began to gnaw at their minds. The old man never slept past dawn. Finally, 2 men forced open his warped wooden door. The smell that drifted out was not rot, but a dry, electric scent like burnt dust and ozone. They found Mr. Ho sitting in his chair, his thin body curled forward, his chin resting on his chest. His hands were wrapped tightly around the old radio, clutching it to him as if it were a newborn baby. His eyes were open, glazed and unseeing, his lips parted slightly in a silent half-smile. For a moment, no one spoke. The air felt heavy and wrong. One of the men stepped forward, reaching out a trembling hand to touch the old man's shoulder. "Ang Ho," he whispered. The second his fingers brushed the thin cotton of Mr. Ho's shirt, the radio crackled. To life, both men jumped back, pressing against the peeling walls. The static grew louder, filling the room with a roaring emptiness. Then, as they watched in frozen horror, a woman's voice rose from the radio, singing an old love song. Her voice was soft, hauntingly beautiful, trembling with sorrow. And layered beneath it, a man's voice joined, cracked and trembling, but unmistakably Mr. Ho's, singing each word in perfect harmony. They buried him 2 days later. His children flew in from America, their faces pale with grief and guilt. They cried beside his simple wooden coffin, whispering apologies for leaving him alone so long. The neighbors told them how he spent his last days quietly, always with the radio beside him, listening to songs from a world long gone. After the funeral, the house was locked and left empty. Dust gathered in the corners. Spiderwebs spun across the cracked windows. Weeds pushed through the concrete outside, curling over the broken steps. Time settled heavily on the walls, pressing the life out of every room. But at dawn, when the first motorbikes roared down the narrow street and the noodle vendors rolled out their carts, the neighbors heard it. A song, faint, drifting from inside. The locked house. A woman's voice, sweet and distant, carrying a melody of longing and lost summers. And woven through her voice, like a shadow following light, was his voice, deep, tired, and full of love. Some mornings, brave children pressed their ears against the rusted gate to hear better. The music was always the same, an old love ballad, its lyrics about yellow leaves falling in autumn, about the fear of loneliness, about waiting forever for the one you love. The children would shiver and run away, telling each other the old. Man's ghost was singing to his dead wife, but the elders knew the truth. They knew it was not a ghost trapped in that house. It was a man who had finally found his way home. A man who wandered years in the wasteland of grief, carrying an unbearable silence in his chest, until a voice reached out to him from the other side and called him back to where he belonged. One night, a young scrap collector passed the house. He had heard the stories from his grandmother. about the haunted radio, about the man who died smiling, about the love song that rose with the dawn. Curious, he slipped through the rusted gate and peered into the broken window. Moonlight poured across the dark room, illuminating the dusty table where the radio sat. Its wooden frame was cracked and blackened with mold, the cloth of its speaker eaten away by insects. But as he watched, the dial flickered, twitching left and right, searching for a frequency, searching for a voice. He turned and fled, never returning to that alley again. Years later, when the city began demolishing old houses to build new apartments, a demolition crew came to Mr. Ho's crumbling home. As they tore down the walls and smashed the tiled floor, they found the radio still sitting on the table. Its batteries had long since corroded into white powder. Its wires were chewed through by rats. But when one of the workers picked it up, brushing dust from the cracked dial, the radio hummed softly under his fingers. He froze, holding his breath. A faint woman's voice rose from the ruined speaker. She was singing in a language he did not understand, but the sadness in her voice pierced straight into his heart. Tears welled in his eyes for reasons he could not explain. And then, through her song, he heard a man's voice, low and trembling, full of devotion and regret. Their voices rose together into a single harmony so beautiful it made the workers' knees shake. The melody faded with a final distant crackle. The radio fell silent forever. No one knows where the radio went after. That, some say, was thrown onto the scrap pile and buried under broken ceiling fans and shattered tiles. Others whisper that it found its way into another lonely home, waiting for someone else to listen, to remember, to long, to surrender. Because every old radio carries something within its static. Sometimes it's only memories. Sometimes it's the dead, waiting for someone to finally hear them.